for our next session, let me bring in some data points that sets context for this session. India's thriving mobile phone manufacturing sector is set to generate 1.5 to 2.5 lakhs of jobs in the next 12 to 16 months, which is driven by government initiatives and a global surge in mobile users. India is also projected to produce 1,250 million handsets by 2025, fueling a $230 billion industry. And well, to discuss this and more, we have our next session on India on the rise, dominating mobile and IT hardware manufacturing. And to moderate this session, may I please invite on stage Ashmit Kumar, Deputy Editor, CNBC-TV18, and his panel of industry experts. Let's have them on stage with a round of applause. Josh Fulgar, he's the President, Zetwerk. Harendra Saxena, CPO, Aether Energy. Ishtiaq Ahmed, Senior Advisor, Industry and Foreign Investment, Niti Aayog. Vinod Sharma, MD, Deki Electronics, and Symbian V, Chief Supply Chain Officer at Tejas Networks. Can we please have all of them on stage?
A very good afternoon to everyone. I think we have with us a formidable panel. I think a lot of industry participants who can throw more light on a completely new dynamic that the electronic space is now dealing with. We are looking at completely changed timelines, completely changed perceptions, completely changed aspirations, and in no small part because of course, how the government has enabled this push. A lot of aspects that are up for consideration. We'll try to address all of them. We'll try to speak to all of our participants on that. Let's first begin with Mr. Ahmed. Thank you so much for this. I just wanted to build on some of the conversations we were having backstage where you were talking about how the PLI has become the buzzword. I think everyone is talking about it. There's so much energy as far as the PLI momentum is concerned. Let me come to you on what went into coming about with this new scheme. What was the thought process? And also importantly, from a forward-looking perspective, what will this transform into? What will it do for the Indian electronics manufacturing space?
Thank you very much. So as far as PLI is concerned, I try to explain it in perspective. So we had the MEIS scheme, and that scheme had to be discontinued. So there was availability of funds. Yeah. So there was availability of funds, and the idea was how to use it. So whether we should utilize the resources very thinly across the tariff line, or we should have the concentrated approach. So idea which came into fruition was like this: you go into the areas of core competency and cutting-edge technology, bet for size and scale, and also penetrate into the global value chains. So underlying purpose was that achieve the manufacturing efficiency so that you can penetrate into the global market, which can happen only if you have size and scale. Now I can briefly tell sector after sector how it was conceptualized, how it achieved the larger purpose of penetrating into the global value chains. For instance, look at the electronic sector, mobile manufacturing. Only limited number of players were selected, and incentive is given if the phone is above 15,000 rupees, so that we are incentivizing the right kind of product, and also it goes into the export markets. Look at the textile. It was only for the technical textiles and the MMF. In pharmaceutical sectors, we had dependency on bulk drugs, APIs, and also dependency on the medical devices. And now the next PLI is also not for the generic medicine, but for those medicines where we can have the higher revenue by exporting the product. So sector after sector, the idea was to build size and scale, get into the manufacturing efficiencies, so that by being efficient in the manufacturing, we can export to the overseas market. Otherwise, you will not be able to protect even our domestic market. So far, if we see more than $10 billion of investment has already been achieved, and over 100 billion of production has already taken place in the country. That is what the success of this PLI scheme has been. And if you look at the electronic sector, we have been exporting mobile phones, which were largely imported. Thank you.
I think that's a big push that the government gave. And you mentioned that I think the imports have dropped for mobiles, and simultaneously we have industry aspirations looking at exports, and that is expected to be the next leg of growth for the Indian industry. Mr. Folger, let me come to you. From the government to the private sector, you're an accomplished player in this space, and courtesy this morning's announcement, you're also the man of the hour. Let me get your perspective in on this. As far as the electronics manufacturing space is concerned, tell us about this pivot that we've seen in the last couple of years, and where is it taking us as we move ahead in this journey?
So before I start, thanks again for the introduction. I want to say that the edges of this this beautiful panel here is Indian IP, manufacturing, and hardcore component manufacturing. So all of these things are ingredients of a pivot, and the key man is sitting to your right, who has made all of this happen. You know, Mr. Ahmed, government policy the last 10 years has been so instrumental in giving us this opportunity. So I want to say that this pivot, which we are talking about in this industry, I'm borrowing this from somebody else. I don't want to quote him on stage here, but I think this is, we are reaching a Y2K moment for Indian electronics hardware manufacturing, the ESDM space. And so clearly, this pivot, what I hope, and maybe I'm saying something out of context here, but in the electronic supply chain, me, Sembian, Harendra, we actually plan around the Lunar New Year. So 1 week, nothing happens, and you got to plan ahead. Inventory spikes up, you know, his blood pressure spikes up along with that. So I'm hoping that with this pivot, very soon we'll have Diwali as a planning factor. So you plan, so the global supply chains have to plan for Diwali. And so that's the pivot. See, I think to answer your question, India is a full stack player. We start IP, which is being created in very advanced and safety security areas. We have manufacturing today, which is, I'll say, not yet in terms of numbers, but I think we are starting to see scale with some mega clusters emerging in the southern part of the country and in NCR here. We have components, you know, LMEC components, you know, which Zetwerk itself specializes, and sort of you know, the actives and passives, you know, which Vinod is in. So I think we have a full play, and I think by the end of the decade, I really anticipate, with the progressive policies coming from the government in areas like semiconductor and beyond, we will definitely be able to enable this a pivot.
I think you've touched upon a very interesting subject. I was referring to semiconductor. Even as we speak, I think shortly from now, our Railway Telecom IT Minister, Mr. Vaishnav, will be addressing a press conference where he's expected to, at least that's the story that we put out on CNBC, he's expected to make a stellar announcement as far as semiconductors is concerned. We'll come to that in just a bit. But Mr. Folger, like you mentioned, on the far end of this panel, we have Indian IP. Let's go across to them. Mr. Sembian, let me begin with you. Just prior to this discussion, we were talking about how there are a lot of interesting policy levers that the government seems to have used. PLI being, of course, clearly one of them. Mr. Ahmed, the architect of PLI here in India. Mr. Sembian, just to give sense as to how these policy levers and these policy messages that are being sent out is being sought to be leveraged to ensure more innovation, more production, more manufacturing.
Yeah. PLI scheme, as Mr. Hamad was saying also, right? It has brought in a lot of momentum into the industry in the last few years, what we have seen. I myself used that in my earlier industry and organization, got benefit for the organization also. So that said, is 5-year PLI enough? Those questions keep coming. But that's one of the things even government has been very clear saying, this is a kickstart that's being given to the industry, and whatever the cost disabilities are to be managed with this have to be brought down with appropriate right steps. So on capitalizing on these things, we need to take the right steps in kind of creating the ecosystem. But are we there? Where are we on those elements? That have to be detailed out more, and there could be more support needed also. Because on the ecosystem development in each of the industry, starting from automotive to mobile to other electronic industry, will be very different. So we need to understand the fundamentals of those and start working towards that. Is 5 years enough or not is something we'll have to see, but at least we'll have to start now and see where we end up at the 5th year and work on that.
Correct. It's clearly an evolving conversation. But from one leg of this manufacturing in India to the other, we've talked about policy levers being used by the government. But on the other end of this panel, to Indian IP, Mr. Saxena, let me come to you. The other leg clearly has been Atmanirbharta, making in India. Tell us about your journey in terms of localization and how that strategy is working for you in terms of global competitiveness.
Sure. Thanks to Zetwerk and also all panelists. To specific, I come from Aether Energy. It's a wonderful organization. We make electric mobility, electric scooters first in India, in some sense first in the world. To answer specific, we are proudly announced to various government officials as well as international forums, we are 92% localized. If you exclude the cells, that's a huge localization effort in the last 4 or 5 years. Of course, this is 92, a little bit up and down, mainly because of the commodity fluctuations. But if you go a little bit one step ahead, a little bit deeper localization, we are not there. We are around 65, 62. Of course, we are much ahead of many others. Many others are following us. So that's to answer you. So we have a gap between the tier 1 localization and of course a deeper step, tier 2, tier 3 localization, which is around 65, 62%.
Interesting. This journey as far as localization is concerned, just a follow-up question on that in terms of what it will take. You mentioned that the value addition is north of 90%. What it will take to assimilate into the global value chains using this strategy of localization?
Absolutely, it's a very, very good answer, a very good question, sorry. I don't know if that I can justify with a good answer. Actually, in the context of how deep you do localization, it always helps to innovative companies, innovative ideas, you know. I'll take example of, let's say, in semicon, if you're choosing whether I should do a fab or I should do a back end, obviously I will prefer to have a fab in India more than back end. If I have to integrate technology, the innovations, what we do on whether body controls, battery controls, navigations, you know, OTAs, everything, it has to be integrated to the real electronics at the design level, at the manufacturing level. Like we have almost 1,000 engineers working. Many of them have done many things first time in the world. So that needs a very deeper and key process integration and localization. That's my take. I also take examples in front of steel makers. Do you want to make steel for construction or you want to make steel for high application like silicon steel or something which is a very high value? The same thing applies to many other areas, you know. That's even there was a discussion just before that we have almost all automobiles are on display now, sure. You know. So do we have to make a choice whether we do the chemical etching process of the glass, which is the key content of that, sure, as compared to somebody who's just assembling that? So just, I'm sorry, it doesn't make sense, I don't know.
Let me, in fact, take that question across to Mr. Sharma as well. Mr. Sharma, you come from a space that has seen stellar growth the last 36 months. We're talking about the IT, mobile space. Give us a sense, same question in terms of ensuring localization and then using this strategy for greater assimilation with the global value chains.
Thank you, Ashmit. First of all, CNBC and Zetwerk for having me here. Yes, so we've been in electronics manufacturing in India for 40 years. This is our 40th year. And what I see playing out is absolutely phenomenal. So let me take a minute or two to sort of lay that ground as I understand it. Electronics hardware itself is the largest manufacturing industry in the world. At the moment, if you put a figure to it, it's about 2.8 trillion. You divide that by the population of the world, 7 billion. You're looking at a $400 per capita consumption of electronics. And what we mean by electronics is changing as we speak. Our friend here from Ather, who I'm a proud supplier of chargers to you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I wouldn't be discussing electronics in two-wheelers 4 or 5 years ago, right? So you made it happen, and fantastic company, of course. So electronics is everywhere now. The choice that India had, and that $400 per capita in India today is $100 per capita only. In the last 5 years, we've come from $50 to $100. I don't think anything should stop us from aspiring to be at least the world average of $400. And that means that our own consumption of electronics is bound to go up by 4 times in 4 years. That's the figure, that's the vision of our own ministry, that's the vision of NITI. So that's talking from $100 billion, $120 billion going up to $400 billion again. And then this is a globally integrated value chain, this whole business. No one country can say that we own the entire electronics supply chain anywhere in the world. When that happens, it means that some out of that $400 billion will automatically get exported. Now, it depends on our policy, it depends on our aspiration. What percentage would that share be? But having said that, I think this race has just begun for India. Our rightful place with 1.4 billion people is exactly the same numbers that China has today. We should be having the same. There is no reason why we should be any short, and that's $1 trillion. So before we get there, however, I look at this as a 4 into 400 meter relay. What Ishtiaq Ahmed Saab and the government of India has triggered is that in that first leg of 400 meters, we suddenly are now getting noticed. We wouldn't be having this conversation, but for some of that government push that came. So we're saying, hey, you know what? Suddenly we were an importer of phones. Now we are a world-class assembler of phones and to some extent an exporter of phones. The second leg deals with, but you won't win this race till you're not a grounds-up manufacturer, designer, a brand owner of this. The second leg is something that we have to play a bigger role today, which is the components part of it. So the PLI can get you assembly into India, at least in the electronic sector. At the sunset of PLI, whenever that comes, and obviously all of us will try to push it as far away as possible, but whenever that comes, we will be asking ourselves question, are we here to assemble something because we get 4, 5, 6% from the government? Or are we here because we have the markets here and we have the suppliers here? And that will be a good question to ask. So the second leg of what we hope, as soon as the new government comes in, we will start discussing in greater detail, is how do we begin to make the components? The beauty of that, all of you who are similar in age to me or older will remember that 30, 35 years ago, we were making all these components in India. All the televisions, the black and whites, the audios were made here with our own picture tubes, our own flyback transformers, our own PCBs. But then several policies, including the ITA-1 policy, rendered a very sort of a fatal blow to that industry. Manufacturers turned into traders. Fortunately, so what we are trying to do, make no mistake, is for the first time we are trying to be a globally competitive manufacturer in a zero-duty regime. There is no protection. At the moment, mobile phones has a duty, but several components that I'm talking about, no duty. The third leg will be the design, the IP, which is, we have to run like in a relay race. You start warming up parallelly and the baton will get shifted. The focus will shift a little bit to the design. And the fourth leg, in my opinion, will be when Indian brands, the Zetwerks of the world, will become global champions. And like today we recognize a Sony, a Samsung, or Panasonic, we will begin to recognize Indian brands that are sold to households all over the world. And not just households, it'll be automobile industry, etc. And not to forget, there's just last one point, which is also to me very, very important to our discussion, is that the way technology is changing. So today, electronics, as I started by saying, if you take just one example of energy, loosely we are going to build up generating capacity equivalent to what we built in the last 75 years. We need to do that in the next 5, 6 years, just to meet our own demands. Now, will we do it the fossil fuel way? No, obviously not. There is a climate issue. So we will do it in a new way, which is generative, solar, wind, hydrogen. All of that will need a lot of electronics because there will be no generation without it. So people sitting on this panel today are going to play a role in generation of electricity, in its storage, in its transmission, distribution, and finally the application of electricity and many other things, much beyond what we know today. So I always tell people, don't look at electronics as a vertical. It's not. It's a horizontal. It'll cut across everything. In the last 1 week, I've been invited to Construction Equipment Association because they use a lot of electronics today. So I'll stop with that, but I think, like I said, the race is just beginning to warm up. There is one regret that at least I was born 2 decades too early. But Josh is young, so he's got to go longer than I do. Yeah.
Let me then ask you a follow-up question. You've given a multiple legs to the journey that we're likely to see in the next few years. One aspect of this journey, of course, in terms of localization, value addition, the push that the government is clearly giving is towards having more foundries here for semiconductors. That's clearly a distinct push. Just the news trigger from today, where the government is likely to approve various foundries here in India, ATMPs, OSATs as well. Just give us some color as to what contribution and what role this will play in terms of furthering this manufacturing drive forward.
Yeah, so just again, if I have a couple of minutes. So, I was reading the other day, and I always just wonder, where did the word manufacturing come from? And it comes from manus, Latin, which means hands. And we are the only species that has a thumb that makes us actually use our hands in very different ways from any other living being, any other species. And that's how we are able to manufacture something. And then you are talking about smart manufacturing, digital manufacturing. And the word digital, again, comes from digits, which is fingers in Latin, because fingers were used for counting. So the moment you added this whole layer of algorithms, software, our friends in the IT, we started coming up with this whole smart manufacturing thing. Now, if you look at it from this digital manufacturing perspective, or this smart manufacturing perspective, where are we headed, right? I mean, what can we aim at in the next few years? I'm sorry, I think I lost, in my chain of thought, I lost the question. So what is it if you tell me?
We just wanted some color as to what role local foundries, semiconductor inputs will play in the electronics industry.
So I think while I was talking of the hands and the fingers, what is very, very important is this animal spirit that goes after this manufacturing. And when the PLI came, a lot of our people who were in the bureaucracy, who were in the government, who had given up on IT hardware, they told people like us, don't waste your time, you're not good at, you can't globally manufacture, focus on software, hardware we'll import from somewhere else. Now, those people were told that, no, we have a way of being, so the belief system got changed. The mindsets got changed saying we can do it. When you have a foundry being announced this evening, I think what it does is it appeals to your heart, and you say, look, this was the piece that was missing. There are several missing pieces, but this is the biggest one. Everybody in the world told us you can't do it. So I think just to get that belief system going, the government is putting $10 billion behind it. But I don't think it's just the money. It's the fact that technology companies, we are doing a lot of design in this country for others. Fabulous designers here. We are doing chip designing for others. We are doing product designing for others. It's a fantastic time for us to come together. And to me, that 1 or 2 or 3 fabs, 8 or 10 OSATs, 20, 30 ATMPs, and several other components, not to only be carried away by semiconductor piece. What that will mean in the next 3-4 years is that we have truly arrived on the scene of smart manufacturing for the world.
Since we are talking about supply chains, Mr. Forgal, let me also get you in on this. That when we look at this push that is coming into the Indian manufacturing space, give us some sense as to what it will take from the private sector perspective, from a government perspective, when we talk about building scalable, quality-driven, cost-competitive value chains in India.
I think kind of building on what Vinod said at this four-legged relay, over the last 10 years, I've seen a very consistent government push. And it's been very consultative. And that's very encouraging, for us. So the second leg, the manufacturers have come. And today, I can tell you maybe 50% of the global value chains and a starting point of domestic value chains are feeling confident about sourcing from India. Harendra talked about 92%. And that's a new category, EV product. I don't know Symbian's number. He will later say that. It's equally getting there, right? So manufacturing and even the third, like the supply chain we are starting, to get there. Now, I think the crowning glory will really be when we have an Indian brand, which comes there. And all of these things start to sync up together. All these four legs, sort of sync up together, and we start to hit some, world-class times, right? The challenge we have is that in Olympics, or when in athletics, there is Asian Games level, and then there is Olympics level. Asian Games, India won an incredible 123 medals. I may be wrong, a little slightly off there, but Olympics, we will see this year, in a couple of months, we will see. The challenge in electronics is that Asian Games are a little tougher than Olympics, because most of the competitors are Asian players. So it's not easy, and they're all moving fast. But India, I think, has a unique proposition of being a full spectrum talent pool. And I think that's going to be the difference. India is 1.4 billion strong, and I mean it. But we have to believe in it together to make it happen. So we have top talent who are able to manage it. We have top engineers who can design, control the process. We have technicians and supervisors who are able to program, maintain, monitor, excel. And then we have the associates who are going to be really, the hands which, all the cobots, depending on the process. So I think the differentiator in this, these relay race, which Vinod talks about, I think is going to be our ability to bring all of this together. This 1.4 billion strong, and I'm so happy that the government has understood that manufacturing cannot be 14%. It has to be 25%, and it's going to be a journey, but I think we are very, very strongly poised to go on that journey.
Well, we certainly have a short-footed start. Mr. Sembian, let me come to you. We've had, through this conversation, a very layered approach being given as to what the road ahead looks like. But that, of course, is in the longer term. In the near term, in the short term, with the horizon of, let's say, the next 2 to 3 years, Mr. Sembian, what are the low-hanging fruits which will yield the kind of benefits and the results that we should be aspiring towards, that the industry should be aspiring towards?
Yeah. Some of the points were touched upon by my co-panel friends. See, one straight away, right, as our title says, India on the rise. And that's the right moment to capitalize on, and we need to have the right steps, as I said earlier. Each of the industry players should take and move forward with their investments and stuff. So, like for example, we take automotive as an industry is like well deep-rooted. Like decades ago, what started in India, and I was part of automotive also then. When the component supplies were developed, the component ecosystem was developed, the point where we start with them is saying that you start now and soon become a global supplier for that same organization, doing all these things, certain compliance requirements, KPI requirements, everything. So to get that, every component supplier was vying for it, and they developed for it, and that's how the automotive industry over a decade and two, they developed and they are deep-rooted today. We're exporting across the globe today from here. Similarly, on the electronics, the component ecosystem, as I said earlier, needs scale. The scalability requirement in electronics component ecosystem is huge. And for that to happen, all the brands, all the OEMs have to have an outward-looking strategy of exports also, as what Josh was saying, right? But to do that, we need to have the right foundations, where we need to have one of the key things for that is, of course, you have the capability to scale, one, that is right. And as a very important factor is the quality, which as Indian manufacturers, we have to take cognizance of. And that doesn't start anywhere in the supply chain. It starts in the design room. That realization is very, very important. Today, most of the people understand quality as a end thing. Okay, on the production line, we take care of it. but it starts in the design room. And the kind of investment, then it calls for investments in the R&D, the design areas, what Mr. Sharma was saying. Those are very, very important. We have to do there, get the capabilities of all the testing requirements, accelerated life testing, so that you get your product to the fullest quality. That's very, very important. And then it follows through the supply chain. Of course, we have to sustain that through the supply chain and give the right product quality to the industry, to the world. Obviously, that will be taken too. That's a very important step which each of the organization have to understand. To your earlier question also, on the PLI things, these are the benefits which, these benefits have to be put back into that, invest, and then move forward.
Fair enough. Looking at the near term, let me come across to you as well, Mr. Saxena, that when we talk of changes that we're likely to see in the near term, with the near-term horizon, very recently we heard of how Apple may not be continuing with its electric vehicle. You think that is an outlier, and that on the way forward, this boundary that exists between the world of auto and electronics is likely to, again, phase out, where there's likely to be maybe greater synergies between the two spaces?
Well, I cannot speak for Apple. Somebody else can. But the synergy with electrification of automotive is very, very high with electronics. I think if I take the BOM of any electric vehicle, whether it's car or two-wheeler or even three-wheeler, the number one comes as a cells, probably energy sourcing, what you call it, whether cells or some other alternate fuel. And then comes electronics. And electronics, both electronics and cells, you need to educate if you're a pioneer. Like if you're doing it first time, you need to teach science and art and fine art of manufacturing or subtle changes in production. In fact, we can give some examples. When we developed cell suppliers all over the world, the same suppliers were followed. Everybody else followed in India, whether it's a four-wheeler or two-wheeler, others, they all followed. And then some who didn't follow, they had problems, actually. So whether we want to think about developing these 2-3 domains, which are key for EV, like if I take a BOM of like whatever, like X, and if your 40-50% of the BOM is these 2-3 areas, electronics or something, why not to do it in India? The key processes, as rightly said by Vinod, and I come back to that point, you have a choice, like you want to make a $10 wafer, 24 nano, or a $5 and sub-$5 wafer with $100 US per wafer. And you have to decide, like, and what will happen if you're making $100 wafer, you have the pioneer technologies, whether EV or probably AI or certain upcoming industries, they're gonna learn together, actually. Not the middlemen will not come in between. So that's my two cents for that.
Great. Let's now shift our focus towards what a forward-looking policy framework may look like. And Mr. Ahmed, I will have to come to you on that. Today we're here discussing smart manufacturing. We've seen, I think, consensus within the panelists that the start has been very sure-footed, courtesy policy initiatives such as the PLI. From a policy perspective, what is perhaps the next lever that the government is looking at when we talk of introducing smart manufacturing and ensuring a smooth migration and adoption of new strategies, Industry 4.0?
Thank you very much. So, Vinod mentioned about the PLI and how long it will continue. Just to clarify that PLI does have a sunset clause, and largely it has been kept for a period of 5 years because the government decided that it will not be desirable to perennially support manufacturing because ultimately benefit is to be given for a limited period of time. After that, they have to be competitive. But he also mentioned about how to go into deep manufacturing. That's the area I would like to touch a bit. So if you look at India, what is attracting investors to India? So I have certain points to mention that we are the fastest growing large economy, 6.7% on an average, while the rest of the world is below 4%. Young demography, median age of around 29 years. So unprecedented investment in infrastructure, logistics cost is improving. Then we have probably the most liberal FDI policy regime in the country. Lots of FDI is coming in the country. And there has been the tax reform, the GST which has been introduced, and India is now a single common economic market. So these are the features which provide India so much of resilience, and investors get attracted to India. But when it comes to the manufacturing, our manufacturing is around $450 billion. When you look at China, they are around 28% of the global manufacturing, around $5 trillion, and they are everywhere. So we have lots of space to grow. And why we are so less? Because we are not participating in the global value chain. Look at the countries which are there in the manufacturing space, whether it is China, even USA, Germany, Korea, Japan, they all participate in the value chains. So if you look at electronics sector, it's a $4 trillion sector, and 75% of the products are the GVC items. And as you mentioned, right, so far the PLI has been only in the space of assembly, but we need to get into the deeper manufacturing, and that would be possible if we participate into the global value chains. That's the area we have identified 2 areas. We are working on that. One is the electronics sector, because 75% of the items are the GVC items. That is where we have to look at. And because of the sheer character of the GVC item, it involves right from the conception to development to actual production. It is spread across geographies, across firms. No single country or firm can say that they can produce entire chain of the value. So they have to be distributed across the geographies, across the companies, and India has to measure its strengths where they can concentrate, and that is the area they have to focus. That is the area where they have to build size and scale. Similarly, if you look at the automobile sector also, it's $2 trillion of component global market, and 700 billion of them is the GVC item. And when we look at our performance, we have been exporting $20 billion and importing of that amount. So that is where a lot of space is there. So unless and until we try to do more into the global value chains, that is where we can attain more and more value. And we have prioritized a couple of sectors. We are working on that. Action would be, a lot of action has been taken, whether it comes to the PLI policy or the XPX scheme or the cluster development. In automobile sector, there has been the PLI scheme, whether it is ACC battery or the EV scheme or the FAME scheme. There have been a number of schemes which have been undertaken. And whatever is required, the government will like to undertake those very initiatives. State governments have also taken their own initiatives. So this is work in progress. We will continue to work on GVCs so that more and more value can be attained when it comes to the manufacturing output.
Right, Mr. Ahmed, thank you so much for that. I'm being told that we've completely run out of time, but we'll begin and end, of course, with these prophetic words from Mr. Ahmed. We began with the acronym PLI, and Mr. Ahmed is hoping to close this conversation with a newer acronym, GVC, that is the push forward. That is where the government's push is likely to come. With that, I'd like to thank all of our panelists. It's been a riveting discussion. There's so much excitement in this space, and we hope to continue this conversation and learn more from industry leaders. Thank you once again for being a part of this conversation.